European Union Withdrawal Bill.
We begin with new clause 70. It would be convenient to consider the new clauses and amendments as set out on the selection paper, and clause 10 and schedule 2 stand part. Lady Hermon to move new clause 70.
Thank you very much indeed, Mrs. Lang. It is chair this afternoon on this very important bill we have today. I am enormously grateful to members of this House, and I'm sorry that in fact that the members who are seated beside me didn't find time to put their names to my see they've been and things like that. But I know when I call a vote this afternoon, if I have to call a vote, and I'm clearly signalling to the government and to you, Mrs. Lang, that it would be my intention, if I don't have a satisfactory response from the government this afternoon, that I will call a vote. Obviously, as I sit clinically, friends in the SNP and in the Labour Party have very kindly indicated that they will provide tellers. Now, extraordinarily difficult position Minister and the BrExit repeat their commitment often to the Good Friday Agreement. I welcome that. I welcome that enormously. But I, of course, expected the government to match their words, to match their rhetoric, to match their promises about the Good Friday Agreement in actions. So when I first collected my copy of the European Union Withdrawal Bill, I expected to see the commitment to the Good Friday Agreement, otherwise known as the Belfast Agreement, written in bold that it would be protected even though the UK is going to leave the European Union. Unfortunately, I did read it very, very, very carefully. And the first mention, as honourable member and right honourable members will know, the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, was an international agreement between the Irish government and the British government. As an international agreement, it had to be incorporated into our domestic law, and that was done by the Northern Ireland Act of 1998. So the first mention that we have of the Northern Ireland Act is absolutely fundamental. The Good Friday Agreement has given us peace and stability for the last 20 years in Northern Ireland, and there can be no denying that. The first mention of the Northern Ireland Act of 1998, which incorporated into our domestic law the Good Friday Agreement, is clause 7, but not just at the beginning of clause 7, but it is in paragraph 6, and not at the beginning of paragraph 6, but at the end in subparagraph F. Now, for the benefit of those members, including members of the DUP who have, as they confirmed, been busy doing all the things, let me just take a moment to read it. These are the sweeping powers given to ministers under this bill. This is clause 7, the sweeping powers given to ministers under this bill to do what they consider appropriate to prevent, remedy or mitigate deficiencies in EU retained law. The point I must emphasise to this House is that the sweeping powers given by clauses 7, 8, 9 and 10 are replicated, they're duplicated in Schedule 2 for the devolved authorities. So the reference to the Northern Ireland Act, which I struggled to find, is in clause 7, subparagraph 6 and F. So the regulations that can be made under this section may not amend or repeal the Northern Ireland Act 1998, open bracket, unless the regulations are made by virtue of paragraph 13b of Schedule 7 of this Act, or are amending or repealing paragraph 38 of Schedule 3 to the Northern Ireland Act 1998, or any provision of that Act which modifies another enactment, close bracket. I commend the legislative draftsmen and women, because I'm sure it's technically absolutely correct. But what on earth does it mean? What on earth does that mean? The legislation has to be clear to those people who read this legislation who are not lawyers, and the vast majority of members in this House are not lawyers. The language is not clear. And may I just say to the clerks of this House, the brilliant clerks who serve this House, long hours into the night and with such enthusiasm, I am enormously grateful to them for their patience, personally with me, but also in their diligence and their great wisdom in drafting new Clause 70, which puts in black and white a bold statement of the commitment to the Good Friday Agreement, to the principles, and I have referred to them in new clause, as you will see, for shorthand, to what I've called the Belfast Principles. These are the principles enshrined in the Good Friday Agreement. For those on this bench, as unionists, it is the constitutional guarantee, it's the consent principle that Northern Ireland remains part of the United Kingdom unless and until there is a border poll, and the people of Northern Ireland, and only Northern Ireland. It's not in the gift of Number 10, thank goodness. It's not in the gift of Dublin. It's governed by the people of Northern Ireland in a border poll. So the principle, the constitutional principle, is guaranteed amongst the Belfast Principles. The principle of mutual respect for all communities across Northern Ireland who were so divided by the Troubles. That is guaranteed in the Belfast Principles, in the Good Friday Agreement. Respect and equality, irrespective of how you vote, your political opinion, your political views, or your religion. Non-discrimination, equal respect for all is guaranteed in the Belfast Agreement. And underpinning, there are many other principles, and I could go on, but it is an enormously important document for those, not just in Northern Ireland, but particularly for Northern Ireland. And I stand here as a unionist, and I am proud to defend the Belfast Agreement, the Good Friday Agreement. And I say that with great pride because I grew up not in some stately home. I grew up on a 50-acre farm west of the Bann, the River Bann, in County Tyrone. Very close to what unfortunately became known as the murder triangle, for the number of people who were murdered, both Catholic and Protestant, by the IRA and subsequently by loyalist paramilitaries as well. Our postman was murdered at the end of our lane. Many of our farming neighbours were attacked on their tractors, or went out to a shed and opened the shed door and there was a booby trap and had their heads, their faces blown off. My father, my late father, made it to 92. The number of funerals that he had to attend of our neighbours, both Catholic and Protestant, can I say, is innumerable. And there is no monopoly on pain and suffering. Every single one of the DUP members in this House, their families, their neighbours, suffered as well. But likewise, in County Tyrone, in 1981, when we had a Conservative government led by the late Margaret Thatcher, we had the hunger strikes, which unfortunately became the best recruiting agent the IRA didn't have in 1981, where 10 young men starved themselves to death. Highly emotive within the Catholic community, within the Republican community, within the nationalist community. Those were the sons of neighbours of ours in County Tyrone. So all communities suffered. My dear late husband, and many of you in this House will have absolutely no idea who Jack Hermon was, because you're all so young. But you are. My late husband, who died with Alzheimer's 9 years ago, was the longest-serving Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary. And he described his officers during the appalling terrorist campaign waged by the IRA and subsequently the Provisional IRA, and then they morphed into something called the Real IRA, and loyalists. Do not forget about the woe the suffering, the grief that was caused by loyalist paramilitaries. My late husband was the longest-serving Chief Constable of the Royal Ulster Constabulary in the history of the RUC. He described his men and his women as extraordinary men and extraordinary women doing an extraordinary job. And they did. If I said that in a population of 1.8 million people in Northern Ireland, there were 302 murdered RUC officers, that's an awful lot of dead police officers. In the 10 years that Jack was Chief Constable, there were almost 100 funerals that he had to attend, and that undoubtedly affected him. But I tell you, when the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and I talked about the constitutional consequences of having Sinn Féin in the executive, and Jack listened to me patiently. He just put up his hand, one finger, and he said, "If it saves the life of one police officer, I'm voting for this." And Jack supported publicly the Good Friday Agreement. And Mo Mowlam, late Mo Mowlam, and her efforts at that time. So the Good Friday Agreement has brought all of us in Northern Ireland stability and peace, which the whole of the UK has benefited from. The Republic of Ireland has benefited from, and since we're talking about Brexit, the European Union has also benefited from, because of course the IRA did place bombs in Germany, Spain, Gibraltar, and elsewhere. So underpinning the Good Friday Agreement, the foundation for it was the fact that, of course, the Republic of Ireland and the UK had joined the European Union on the same day, at the same time. It was the cornerstone, it was the foundation of the Good Friday Agreement. So that in the Good Friday Agreement, when those born in Northern Ireland can choose to identify themselves as British or Irish, or indeed both, they also regarded themselves as Europeans. As Europeans, the border became virtually invisible. So where we'd had watchtowers, where we had murders, where we had security checks, where we had unapproved roads, cratered, you could not drive across it. So that if you were going to school on one side of the border, or going to a community hall, or going to church, or indeed to chapel, you had to get out of your car and tiptoe round the uncratered part of the road. Those roads have been filled in again. We have normality in Northern Ireland. We have peace. And we undoubtedly have people alive today that would not otherwise have been alive. And may I just say, ever so loudly and strongly, to senior members of the Conservative Party, I do not want to hear them or see them on television talking about pushing ahead and no deal. Let's just move on with a no deal. It is an absolute nonsense. It is so reckless and so dangerous. Because dissident Republicans, and the Home Secretary sat here yesterday and made a statement, particularly talking about counter-terrorism. Dissident Republicans are active, they're dangerous, they're ruthless, utterly ruthless. And if I had a child or a grandchild who hadn't chosen a different career, I don't have any grandchildren, by the way, but my two children have chosen other careers, it won't be politics, but sadly, because we do need leadership in Northern Ireland, we do need young people coming into politics. But I would not be encouraging them to join the UK Border Force or HMRC in the event of no deal Brexit, because we will inevitably have a hard border. And it must be a moral responsibility, a duty on this government to take care of all personnel, all officials in HMRC, in the Police Service of Northern Ireland and the UK Border Force. And while it's all very well and good to have talked about taking back control of our borders, that was a very catchy refrain during the EU referendum. I could never get any clarity, and I still can't all these months later, on how exactly we propose to take back control. But in the event of no deal, we certainly face a hard border, and dissident Republicans will regard PSNI officers, HMRC officers and UK border officials as legitimate targets. I don't want that on my conscience. And I don't believe for one moment that the Prime Minister wants that either, or the government. So for senior members of the Conservative Party, I plead with them to stop the nonsense of talking up a no deal. It is, with the greatest respect to the Home Secretary, who quite wisely described it as unthinkable. It is unthinkable. She may not be here, but I'll quote her anyway, because I've agreed with her and I hold her in very high regard anyway. So, why am I so committed to this? Well, I'm so committed to this because, in fact, half of my life has been blighted by the Troubles. And on the day that the Good Friday Agreement was signed, and I wasn't in politics. I was not involved in politics at that time. I was not a member of David Trimble, who at that stage was the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party. He and I had taught together in the law faculty in Queen's. If anybody cares to look, in fact, my specialism was EU law, which is also why I'm so passionate about this. But David Trimble, who was such a remarkable, courageous leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, he never quite liked or could understand my interest in EU law. And so the fact that he's in another place and is asked for his views on so much, he and I will never, ever fall out. But we've always had a disagreement over the EU. But my love for it continues. I accept that Brexit is going to happen. Brexit is going to happen. We as a United Kingdom have to come out together, and the Prime Minister made that quite clear at Prime Minister's questions here today. But in doing so, we cannot risk undermining all that has been gained through the Good Friday Agreement. The lives have been saved, the normality that we have had, and which will carry on. But people in Northern Ireland are extremely nervous. They're extremely nervous. There's one party, the DUP, and I'm just describing factually. And they're my, they're colleagues, they're friends. Though sometimes I wonder by the tone of voice that they might use to me. But when the government, and it is a Conservative government, and just remember, there is that history of a previous Conservative government, led by Margaret Thatcher, which caused such divisions and such hurt and anger and rage and outrage in one part of the community in Northern Ireland, and that would be the Republican nationalist community, and the way the hunger strikes were handled. It is critically important that a Conservative government, which is supported by the DUP, bears in mind all of the people of Northern Ireland, and that the DUP do not speak or represent all of them. So my new clause, well, of course, I'd be delighted to give way to the right honourable learned gentleman.
Not one of the senior members of the party she's criticising, I don't think. Does she agree with me that the Prime Minister, 48 hours ago, reached an agreement with the Taoiseach which seemed to show that she shared the Honourable Lady's concerns? Because you can't have an open border without having some regulatory convergence and customs convergence both sides. And that all came to an end when the DUP vetoed it, which makes it extremely important, more than it was, that her amendment is now put into the bill to make sure we're not backsliding. Although, of course, the DUP could always actually rescue their reputation if they confirm that their only objection was not having regulatory and customs convergence across the whole United Kingdom. And they were quite prepared to agree, as she and I would, that regulatory and customs convergence across the whole of the island of Ireland is certainly in the interests of the inhabitants of both sides of the border.
Thank you, Mrs. Lang. That was really, really very interesting. Lots of points that were raised there. The DUP will have to speak for themselves, and I'm sure at some point this afternoon they will want to contribute to this debate. And I'm also intrigued that, in fact, that the Right Honourable Gentleman, and I'm hugely grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for confirming that, in fact, that he feels that the government should accept this new clause today. Thank you. What was so interesting earlier when we had Prime Minister's questions, and I did feel deeply embarrassed for the Prime Minister on Monday. What was so interesting in the demeanour of the Prime Minister today was her confidence at the dispatch box and her response to the honourable gentleman who had a question on the paper, the honourable member who represents Strangford. It was a very interesting question and it was also a very significant reply, I thought, from the Prime Minister. And the fact that she seemed so calm, not that she doesn't normally seem calm, but on this, well, forget about the party conference, and that was a very difficult experience for us. Wouldn't like it to happen to any of us. I suspect that, in fact, there's been a lot of speaking to the leader of the DUP since Monday. That's what I'm hoping has happened, but I'm not in that inner circle. I'm not a member of the DUP, and they don't come along to me and say, "Ha, here's the draft memorandum, have a look at it." They don't do that. So I hope I'm right in saying that, in fact, there has been progress, and if I'm not right, I'm sure one of the members for the DUP will quickly be on their feet and contradict me, and they haven't. So,
I don't think it's worth it.
Well, that's very disappointing.
Could I intervene?
Yes, of course.
Could she answer the question posed by the right honourable gentleman when he said, does she accept, as he does, that it's a good idea to have regulatory convergence and common rules between Northern Ireland and the Republic? Could you give a straight answer to that? Because many in Northern Ireland now view her as being on the side of the Dublin government on these issues.
Oh, shameful.
Quite accurate, though.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, the Right Honourable Member for North Belfast.
Answer.
Yes, what do you do? What do you do in response to that?
Answer.
Sorry, I can hear. If the honourable gentleman would just give me a chance instead of chuntering away, I might actually reply to him. The Prime Minister and indeed the BrExit Secretary yesterday made it absolutely clear that it had, at least I understood the statement made by the BrExit Secretary yesterday, that it was always the intention of the Prime Minister and indeed the Government that there would be the same regulatory alignment right across all of the United Kingdom. And if, just for the record, if the Right Honourable Gentleman wants me to say, again, I am a unionist and I am not in the pocket and I am not propping up and have not spoken to the Dublin Government, and I strongly resent the implication in his question that I was.
Would the Honourable Lady give way?
Yes, of course.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. She and I have got on very well since we entered the House together. As the Speaker might have said, 16 years and I think 4 months ago, or something approaching that. But would she agree with me that the Right Honourable Member for North Belfast asked her a very specific question in relation to what the Right Honourable Member had said about convergence across the island of Ireland? And to date, in the few minutes that has elapsed, I haven't heard a specific answer to that query.
I'm most grateful to the Honourable Gentleman. I just promoted the them to Right Honourable. That is not what I understood. So there's no point in putting up a straw man for me to knock down. What I understood the Prime Minister took with her as proposals to Brussels was always that the entirety of the UK was to have the same alignment. Northern Ireland, the Prime Minister is no one's fool. The Prime Minister has made it quite clear that she is going to protect the integrity of the whole of the United Kingdom. She had already ruled out having a border down the Irish Sea, and therefore I actually believe and trust that the Prime Minister, when she went to Brussels, had always planned that there would be convergence throughout all of the United Kingdom, and that Northern Ireland was certainly not just going to be treated differently from the rest of the United Kingdom. That's the confidence that I have. The Right Honourable Gentleman, of course.
Grateful to give way because she may share with me a certain amount of amusement. As a unionist, there can be no question for me of there being a separate regulatory arrangement for Northern Ireland, permitting it to have regulatory equivalence or convergence with the Republic. It either applies to all of us or it can't apply at all. And I have to say that I think the idea of regulatory convergence for all of us, with the Republic and indeed the rest of the EU, strikes me as being a very good idea.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very grateful indeed to my Right Honourable and learned friend, even though he sits on the other side of this House, I've always regarded him as a friend. So I'm very grateful indeed to him. So the Right Honourable Gentleman has just summed up how I feel, in that I am not going to stand here and criticise our Prime Minister. She is the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. I believed that, in fact, her stance when she went to Brussels on Monday was that all of the United Kingdom was going to be, the convergence was going to be with all of the United Kingdom, and not for one moment did I believe that she was going to cast Northern Ireland off somehow to a regulatory framework and convergence on the island of Ireland and not with the rest of the United Kingdom. So no, of course, I did not want Northern Ireland to be treated any differently from the rest of the United Kingdom. We all are coming out of the EU, sadly, on the 29th of March 2019, and that's what the referendum result in Northern Ireland was, that in fact we remain, but the UK-wide referendum result will be honoured, and the Prime Minister has said that repeatedly. So, as we move towards that, I have to urge and encourage the Government to adopt, in some form of words, new Clause 17, because the principles of the Good Friday Agreement, which I am proud to support, and other members who have signed my new clause are equally proud to support, that has to be protected in black and white on the face of the bill, and that's the assurances I need from the government benches this afternoon. Otherwise, I will test the commitment of the House to the Good Friday Agreement. Thank you.
Northern Ireland, the